Yes, cheers. This tea is so good.
Yeah, so you said you wanted an herbal tea, and I thought that sounded excellent.
It's a perfect day for it.
It is a perfect day. And I just want to get right into it. And I want to know what the Fresh Exchange is. It's a blog, a podcast, a community, but I want to hear it from you. So what is the Fresh Exchange?
Yeah, so Fresh Exchange was started in 2010 as kind of like a just creative outlet. I was fresh out of college. I was graduating with a creative degree in a recession. So obviously like kind of was not a good time to be a creative. And I was working remotely for a company in LA, basically as a pixel pusher. And I came back here because my parents offered me a room and I was bored and with my work. And so I just created a blog to just be this creative outlet for me. And as I've gone, it slowly has turned into something far more than that. And I realized that I loved the creative process of telling stories and everything. But, you know, I got into it as this like business where I was promoting products and working with brands, and it was this whole thing. And then I got pregnant and was going to start a family. And I started realizing that I started thinking back to this moment in college where I had a professor. He said that being a creative individual, we have control over how we create the world around us. We can choose to use it for good or we can choose to use it for bad in some way or the other. And we get to control that. And so I started evaluating, I think, you know, knowing I was bringing another life into the world and what was the world that I was creating for this new human made me really, you know, get kind of existential and be like, okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know, how do I feel good about this? Is this what I want to be telling my son that I did with my life? And in that process, I started realizing it wasn't. And so I went through this like couple years after I had him where I just kind of walked away from all of it. I walked away from the brand partnerships. I walked away from the things, you know, because I didn't feel it was bettering the world. I wasn't making people feel good in my mind, even though, you know, it just didn't feel right to me.
Sure.
And I honestly thought about quitting it.
The very first sentence on your website, it reads, focused on helping others find their way back to who they are through the very land under their feet. When did it click that, like, this was going to be your mission? And what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. So it's like perfect because when we came back here, I started realizing I was like, you know, looking for grounding in some way, looking for a purpose. And I thought back to the times when I was young and I was spending all this time at my grandfather's garden in Harbor Springs. And it was the one place that just felt pure and whole and grounded. And I was returning to that over and over and over again as a new mom, going through this transition in my life. And I realized how much I needed the soil, the seasons, and I started, you know, focusing on eating locally and, you know, just living here, it's kind of hard not to. And when you have all these farms around you and everything. And so it started to become this pureness of living. And I realized I was like, this is where we come back to ourselves. It's the antithesis of when we live seasonal, when we get into the garden, when we put our hands in the soil and we're focused on nature. It's the antithesis of this online world that tells us everything but this, you know? And so I realized that I could help people reconnect with themselves by helping teach them how to grow a garden, how to eat seasonally, how to do these things. And so Fresh Exchange took a major turn, and that's what that means.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, kind of backing up, where are you originally from? And then when did you move to the area? And were you always, did you always have this connection to nature?
Yeah, ever since I was a kid. It's like always been a really natural place for me and where I thrived. But I'm from Harbor Springs, Michigan originally. My family, like, parents born and raised in the area, like everything, so in the little Traverse Bay area. But I didn't really come down to Traverse City much, and it wasn't till my parents moved down here after we had lived in southern Michigan that we came back up. My parents came back up here when I was in college, and we were living in the Grand Traverse region, and I came back with, you know, one summer, and I was like, oh my gosh, this place, this is home. Like, this is where I'm meant to be.
Yeah.
And so it always has called to me ever since then.
Sure. Yeah. Now, for those who want to begin this journey, what's an easy first step to kind of reconnect with nature, and maybe even someone for myself? I would like a garden. I don't have one yet, but this sounds great. So what's like a good first step on this journey?
Yeah, I think begin where I did. I just started getting curious, like the little farm stands along the way. I just started grabbing food from them. On my way into the grocery store, I would pick up the things on my list first there or see what they had, and then just start cooking from there. Getting curious with the food that is right around us in the seasons is a great way to connect to the seasonal rhythm. But then when you do get to a point where you can have a garden, just starting small. Like, you don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. A few pots of herbs, like, easy ones would be like, mint in a container or something like that. It's amazing how that just changes everything. And the garden is really just a playbook for the seasons. You can't not be aware of them and have a garden.
Right. Okay, I really want to get into what you talk about, these seasonal rhythms. And I've listened to your podcast where you've talked about it, and this 4-season lifestyle, and using the seasons to your advantage, and especially if you're going through transitions yourself in life. So, I'm getting engaged, I'm moving. So when I heard like last Friday's episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love thinking about it in this way. So can you speak to, especially as we're going from like late fall into winter, when you're talking about these seasonal rhythms, besides just obviously the obvious, how do you use them to your advantage?
Yeah, so I started realizing like that when I was observing the seasons really closely, as in that time where I was making a lot of transitions myself, I started realizing that every single season and even every month has these kind of lessons for us. And what they do is year after year, they allow us to kind of move that muscle. You think about it as a workout. So we can just take November, for instance. To me, November is all about transitioning. It's the messy middle. It's like, and I think that's just like, if we're honest, like when we go through any transition in life, it isn't clean. Like today even, we woke up and it was covered in snow. There's still snow on some of the hills, but yet we still have fall leaves. We're still eating out of our gardens in some way. There's Brussels sprouts growing over here. There's still things alive and growing, but we're definitely seeing that transition happen. And when those things meet, it tells us that this is like a season of both and. And so that's a lesson in which we can take and say, when we're going through transition, it's okay to feel sad and excited, or, and why can't we live in both of those emotions? And so even though, the trees are beautiful and we're going through that transition, like there's also this like beautiful notes that we can take from nature in order to help us kind of move that muscle a little bit and observe how nature does it.
I love that. And I guess personally, how does it playing out in your personal life right now? I love the specific examples too, because it really it makes it so relatable.
Yeah, I mean, for me, we're going through transitions with like school and kids, and like there's just so many things about like, I mean, I'm seeing it in the garden, like obviously, but in life, I think about all the different transitions that we're just going through. I mean, Mike's going through a career change, I'm, adjusting some things in my own personal business, there's all these little things. And so those things can be really hard if we just approach, like they could be really hard, or we could miss something in those moments where, my son's starting a new school. It could be if I could miss the fact that this is a key moment in his life, but also a hard moment, and I can help engage with him, that in this moment we can feel both those things, and that's okay. And so I think he feels more seen, and I have a better understanding of how to relate to him because of watching this messiness of everything right now. Even in its beauty, it's messy and beautiful. So
totally. Now, so what would we find you doing on your property, in your yard, in your garden right now in November?
Well, I just planted my garlic and all my flower bulbs last week. I waited And so I did it when it was warm, but I've always had this thing that, like, if your hands aren't slightly freezing when you're doing it, then you're probably doing it too early.
Oh,
So,
okay.
because there have been many times I've done it way too early. I'm always like, oh, it's middle of October. This must be what I do, because but I've learned to just watch the weather and really like rhythmically watch things. And with climate change and everything, things are adjusting. And so we can't just stand by like these dates anymore. Sometimes we have to adjust.
Right.
And so doing that, clearing everything out and laying a lot of fresh new compost, because we use regenerative models, so we don't do any tilling. We use a lot of polyculture where plants can communicate with one another, and so we got to rebuild the soil properly so they can all coexist together in these like little ecosystems in our garden. So there's a lot of that. We also just built a greenhouse yeah, for seed starting, and so I'm excited to try that out outside.
Are you self-taught? Where did you get your green thumb?
I said, like, I spent a lot of time in the garden with my grandfather growing up. My parents had a garden when I was a kid. We spent a lot of time doing that. And then when I graduated and the recession was going on and my husband and I were completely broke, like literally barely making $20,000 a year, broke, I was like, you know what, let's grow a garden. And so we started this little garden, and it fed us like all summer, other than like getting some dried beans and rice and things like that. And it just taught me like how we can live on so little but have so much in that moment. And it was really cool to see. So I think situations like that, and then
And such nutritious and healthy, yummy food too.
right, and it's right there, and then nothing tastes better than the stuff straight out of the ground. So and then I've had the opportunities to, you know, get to know local farmers and learn from them, and just a lot of Googling and trying things and failing. I fail a lot.
Okay, I like to hear that.
Yes, a lot of failing.
Yeah, sounds like a labor of love too.
Yes, it's a passion project for sure. Yeah.
Now, you talk about community a lot. You have your own community within the Fresh Exchange, and I'm curious what the community is like. How would you describe the community in Leelanau County?
I would say the community in Leelanau County is creative and this like beautiful, empathetic rainbow of love, I feel like. But I also feel like there's a deep value to have rich and intentional life. And across the board, you know, I think some people would be like, oh, it's such a mix of politics and things like that. But I think the one key thing that we all value is that we want to live well. And we know how to do that here. And so I just like love seeing all the situations throughout the seasons where people are trying to enjoy and create meaning in their life beyond themselves and in a communal aspect.
Well, that's the quote right there. I love that, and I think that was so well said. I also want to go back to kind of like gardening 101, and you touched on it as like this an easy first step. So for someone who truly is like wants to get into this lifestyle, and what are some of the first steps you can take like for a garden? You mentioned mint is somewhat easy.
So easy. It can overtake your garden, so you got to keep it contained.
Okay.
But I definitely don't suggest tomatoes. I never suggest tomatoes to beginners. They are very hard. And I don't like beginners to feel like they failed right away. I love to encourage people to grow lots of herbs and flowers, because we have this idea that like growing vegetables is how we grow a garden. But a garden can simply be herbs and flowers, and it's still just as life-giving. And vegetables are very hard. Each one requires different nutrients, different watering situations. It can be very challenging. And so I always tell people, just start with some herbs, start with some flowers. You know, cosmos, zinnias are so easy. And, you know, you can grow lavender and all these other things that are so beautiful and life-giving.
That's excellent advice. What questions do you get asked all the time? I'm just curious what.
The main question is like, what it's like to live here. And like, how do I move here and live in this lifestyle? So outside of, you know, gardening, I mean, there's always like the little questions about pests and things like that in the garden. But definitely the number one question.
And what's the answer?
I tell people that they need to experience all 4 seasons. And I think, I mean, I could even pose that question to you. I mean, like, you've come and moved and like experienced it all, and like, you know, I think it
was the 4 seasons that honestly sealed the deal.
Yeah.
Because I loved
You have to
coming
like
here
them.
in summertime, and then to experience the fall and the fall colors, and continuing to do hikes and outdoor activities and bonfires, and then the winter wonderland, and then the foraging in the spring.
Oh, it's so fun.
And the off season allowed me to experience some of the restaurants and things that are pretty busy during the summer.
Yep.
So yeah, to your point, it's the seasons that each one is just so special on its own.
Yeah, and you gotta, I think, like, I just tell people, like, you gotta be able, if you love winter, you gotta really love it.
Yeah.
Or else you gotta find a way to escape it if you're gonna live here.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to be, like, committed to that sort of lifestyle. I mean, we all leave a little bit in the winter. I mean, that's part of living here, I think. But I just, like, tell people, like, it's about that sort of investment. Because everybody lives here, has a way, like, it's a very Scandinavian concept of living. Like, you know, you sauna in the winter and you're at the beach in the summer. Like, they're equally loved, right?
Yes.
And
And I took up cross country skiing, which filled up my, gave me a reason to be outdoors. I mean, here we are mid-November and still sitting outside.
yeah, and it's lovely.
And yeah, and as you know, the fire was so smoky, but you know, we put our fire out for this conversation, but the fires kept me warm all winter long. My friends and I, we did a fire every Saturday night, and as long as you have the right gear and you're bundled up, you can still hang out in the wintertime.
Yep, there's not bad weather, just poor clothing choices.
Yeah, right.
That's what my dad always told me growing up. So
Yeah, so true.
I saw that like your bathroom was featured in a New York Times article. And your home, we're at Farm Club here, and your home is 5 minutes away, up over that hill or on top of the hill.
It's on the backside.
So, do you have any advice for someone who, I know it's hard to build right now, but wants to move to the area and might be considering building their dream home, or any advice about that entire experience?
I think you gotta know, like, for us, like, the key when we were looking at our land and buying everything and choosing our house location was thinking about light, because we were thinking about this time of year. Like, when you build a home, your light is so important, and you can choose how you orient the house and where you position it. And when it gets the proper amount of light coming in with the windows facing in the proper directions, you can both, like, be really environmentally friendly, because you can capture wind and sun to warm the house and lower your heating bills and cooling bills. And then also, like, the light is so important, as you know, like, in the depths of winter.
Yeah.
Like, and so that bathroom has like 5 windows in it. And the reason being is, like, I knew that, like, I wanted it to capture all the seasons and be able to take in all that northeast light that was coming in that space. And everything about the house was just, like, inspired off of the landscape and the colors and everything.
Okay,
so
our second drink might have to be over at your place. I'm inviting myself over, maybe this spring. What excites you most about winter? What are you looking forward to?
rest. You know, I think it's so, with the sunlight, you know, really not dipping until, like, being on our hill, like, it doesn't really go down until like 11 o'clock some nights, like, fully. So it's like we're still getting that lingering light, and I find it really hard to get good rest, even with blackout blinds in our room, because it just feels like there's an energy, and then there's a shift of energy when the light shifts again. And I find myself heading to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I'm like reading a book, and I can catch up on all those things that just felt like I was treading water with in the summer. So I'm always looking to winter as this time to hunker in and focus on tending to my roots and like who I am and like what I want. And so that when I reach the spring, you know, I always see spring as New Year's. And so in some way, because it's like a rebirth of ourselves, we're rising into the light. So I don't know. I
hear you. It in the summertime there are kids playing outside when I'm like ready to go to bed, and it's tough to see the sunset and then see the sunrise in the summertime.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like a 6-hour like real setting, like that it's actually gone. So
yeah, I'm welcoming the sun setting earlier.
the darkness is rather nice. A lot of people give it a lot of flack, but
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna be more like you and think of, you know, just embracing each season for what it is.
yeah.
So I loved hearing about, you know, the why and, you know, what the Fresh Exchange and your brand and blog is all about. So what, I'd love to hear what's next and what we can, what's next in your world and what's to come from the community you've created online and up here.
Yeah, so one of the main things I'm focusing on, particularly this winter, after the holidays, and basically by mid-January, I'm launching our first online e-course, and it's all about helping people plan and design their own like regenerative polyculture garden, like how to do it. I'm going to walk through the process, and my goal is to help, you know, about 500 people start their gardens in this model, because these sort of gardens help to capture carbon. They help to, you know, make a really good, like, impact on our ecosystems. They're mini ecosystems that feed pollinators, the soil, like everything around us. And so my goal is to utilize this e-course to help make an impact on people's lives and ecosystems.
It hasn't
launched yet.
So we can sign up
Mid-January.
Mid-January. Well,
Yes.
I hope I get one of those spots to sign up, because that's great. That's awesome. Cheers to you.
Well, thank
And
you.
the
Thanks for
Fresh
having
Exchange.
me.
Thanks.
Yes,
For coming down the street. to Farm Club,
absolutely.
your
Anytime.
hang, and,
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Farm Club.
Yeah. Cheers.